Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So I just returned from 6 weeks visiting Canada, meeting a lot of people, busily running around all over the place, including me, I guess. I wasn't running though, mindfully walking around airports. But I just began to wonder what all the people are running for. Where are they going? What are they running? What's the purpose of their activities? I guess most people, very simply, we say they're chasing after the 4 requisites, basic necessities of life. People running after a livelihood. And, quite a few people, especially in Canada, they're quite comfortable, at least people in the airports anyway, I guess, who can afford to travel. But their basic necessities of life are fulfilled, but then what do you do? For some people, it's just a matter of, more of the same. They have enough to eat, but then they have more energy. They still have energy left over, so they try and find the best food, the best clothes, the best place to live, and all their energy is put into just material benefits, material progress, so to speak, increasing their materiality. There's some people who maybe they think a bit further afield, they think a bit wider horizons. Maybe they're traveling to broaden their mind, broaden their experience. But what's the real? If you really think about it, what's the real purpose of life? The Buddha pointed out, the importance of spiritual practice. While we need, of course, the basic necessities of life, the food, shelter, lodging, medicines, clothes, right? Especially now there's winter. But how much is enough? Once those are satisfied, then what do we do with our energy, with our time and energy? And for some people who recognize the importance of, you can say mental development, maybe you can say spiritual practice. I mean, not everybody can recognize perhaps the value of spiritual practice, but at least maybe they recognize the value of developing their mind, a bit more peace of mind. I talked to somebody when I was in Canada, and I mentioned to them about the Buddha pointed out the importance of the quality of life rather than the quantity. I said, well, what's the quality of life? And I said to them, peace of mind. They said, well, I never heard that before. To them, the quality of life was having a better house, having more money, having more food, more fancy clothes. That was quality of life. I said, what? There are people who have all those things but are miserable. They don't. These things are not. These are like a secondary way of achieving happiness, if you like, and it's very unreliable. People try to get more possessions and thinking it'll make them happy, but does it really make them happy? Is there ever really an end to it? More. And many times it's just a superficial kind of contentment or happiness. Their mind is disturbed. The mind is unhealthy, unpeaceful, it doesn't matter where you live, you can live in the most beautiful place, but are you really, really well? Even though you have all the physical things outside, but if your mind isn't well, then it's the real source of wellness is in the mind. And fortunately, we coming across the Buddhist teachings, people have experimented all through the ages with ways to find well-being, mental well-being. There's all kinds of philosophies and theories and, of course, different religions too. Some of them are, you can say they have been somewhat successful maybe, for some people have believed. There's religions which have more followers than Buddhism, and I'm sure they're happy to a certain degree. But when it comes to the ultimate happiness, they've been able to realize the ultimate happiness. They're just a promise of, a wonderful place after you die. What about now? What do you do in the meantime? Keep praying and hoping, and and hopefully you make it in the end, But to me, the Buddhist teachings, as we do in the chanting, we say it's to be experienced individually by the wise. It's right now. It's here and now, to be seen right now, not in a future life, but here and now. And to be able to do that, of course, requires some degree of putting the teachings into practice, not just hoping and praying, and praying to the Buddha, may I realize Nibbana when I die. And unfortunately, don't want to disappoint people, but the Buddha is already gone. So praying to the Buddha is not going to do much good because he's not listening. You have to do the work yourself. Follow in his footsteps, follow his path. And maybe it takes a certain amount of confidence or maybe just faith. The Buddha was somebody who did find a way. Fortunately, we have these Buddha images. Most of the Buddha images, the Buddha looks pretty peaceful, huh? Yeah. Mostly. Well, years ago, somebody painted. There's a sculpture. I think it's in the Pakistan Museum of the fasting Buddha. The Buddha when it's fasting, but it wasn't the Buddha. It was before he was enlightened. You see, it's the Buddha to be. He did all these austerities, these fasting austerities, and stayed awake all night and did these austerities, which he discovered in the end was not the way to enlightenment, fortunately. So be relieved of that. You don't have to fast until you become a skeleton. It's a very dramatic image, but it's not actually the Buddha. It's before he was enlightened. But otherwise, most of the images of the Buddha he's very peaceful, sitting there very quietly, very peaceful expression on his face. So it gives you some indication of what he experienced. It can be very, very inspiring sometimes to look at these images, to get some indication of the possibilities which his teachings makes available to us. But it requires for us to actually put it into practice too. So a lot of the teachings, the religions, they just talk about just having the hope and the prayer that, that things will work out for you. They'd be looked after by somebody up there. Yeah. But in the Buddhist teachings, it's about experiencing the teachings, putting into practice right now, and then we put it into practice right now, we see results right now too, not just later. And fortunately, the Buddha's given us a very, very clear path of the practice. People have interest in discovering the truth, many different paths to follow, and it's in a way one has to find out for oneself, maybe experiment a bit, but the Buddhist teachings is very clearly delineated, very clearly defined, available to us. And in the Eightfold Path, for example, the very first thing is to have a right view. You know, a lot of people, they start off in their spiritual journey, and it is a bit of a, just kind of floundering around, don't know quite where to look yet. Try this and try that, and nowadays there's all kinds of information available on the internet. When I was a student, there's many different things available in the library. You go to the library and which book today? Which path will I follow today? Taoism, Confucianism. And you're just kind of lucky to get the right book about it too, because many different explanations, especially even in, I guess, even in the so-called Western religions, and different people have different angles on it, different sect, different traditions. But when we come around to it, that when it's helpful to try different paths, different approaches. When in a way, one needs to find one which suits one's own temperament. They talk about in the scripture, not the scriptures, but in some of the Buddhist texts, they talk about the different temperaments of people. There's some people they're more faith orientated, so they value a more faith orientated approach, a lot of devotion. Others, they're more inclined to do, say, practical way of approach. They want to do some exercises. Others, they benefit from understanding more, from the study, and then trying to put those words, that theory into practice. The Buddhist teachings, it is a little bit of, it can be applied at all different levels. There are meditations for the faith temperamented person, like the recitation of the Buddha, Dhammasanga. There was meditations for, those who are like the activity more walking meditation, following trying to be mindful of the body in its various postures. And then there is meditations for those who are more intellectually inclined. Generally speaking, we learn about, people come to learn about meditation, and it's explained in kind of a little bit more of a textbook way, starting off with just focusing on breathing to calm the mind. But actually there are quite a variety of different meditations. And different teachers would give different emphasis to different meditation techniques. Some teachers are more technique orientated. They have a very precise or very specific method of practice. And I tried some of these techniques, and they're useful for a while. But I found over the years, when there was a specific technique, they seemed to maybe be geared to giving particular results quite quickly. But in the end, what happens is that the ego finally gets used to it. It finally wises up to the technique, and after a while it doesn't work anymore. So I found Ajahn Chah's approach, which was, for some people, is a little bit too vague, because he didn't have any particular neat technique, but there is the standard way of practices, following the breathing, practice of mindfulness. But Ajahn Chah had a very broad, you can say, pragmatic approach, because he recognized that there was a great diversity of people. And just in the Buddha's time, the Buddha was talking to and teaching different people with different levels of spiritual practice and different levels of attainment. So the Buddha had quite a variety of different ways of teaching. So there is in the Buddhist forest tradition, we talk about skillful means. this is apaya in Pali, skillful means. So this is, requires that one have some experience of one's own mind first, as one becomes more aware of the particular habits of mind, the tendencies of mind. Then you recognize that there are various different modes of thinking, have habits to deal with. So maybe one has to come up with some particular techniques or some skillful means to deal with them. And there's, of course, the basic ones, greed, aversion, delusion. We all have, I assume, still some greed, aversion, delusion. So those ones the Buddha gave, particular meditation practices, the practice of anapanasati, focusing on the breathing to deal with the delusion, metta bhavana for aversion, the subha kamatan for greed. But then we each, beyond that, we have our own particular type of aversion, for example. And sometimes these maybe require our own particular adaptation, find our own skillful means to work with them. So I asked Ajahn Chah about skillful means one time, and he just said very, very simply, as most of the time he gave these simple answers which had very profound meaning to them. He just said, if it works, then use it. Yeah, if the technique works, use it. Of course, it implies that you have to put it to the practice first, to try it out before you can find out if it works or not. So he is open to a great variety of different possibilities. And some people were quite creative. Some people were quite adventurous, if you like, in their practice. They could try different skillful means. And when one finds out that if one continues with spiritual practice, you probably need a variety of different skillful means to deal with the great variety of issues that come up in your meditation. I met people who've, they say they learn meditation, and as watching the breathing, for the last 10 years, they just watched the breathing. What? For 10 years? Who did I ask recently? Oh, somebody was saying they're just watching the breathing, and I said, well, so for the last many, many years, and I said, well, is your mind calm yet? No, not yet. Maybe you might need a different technique. If breathing isn't working, maybe you need to try something else. For example, if you're trying to calm your mind and it's not working, it might be helpful to try and look at what is that disturbance. Rather than just trying to calm it, try and look at what kind of disturbance it is. Is it, kind of on the aversion level? Is it kind of on the greed level? Is it a type of greed or aversion? And then maybe you have to apply one of these other meditations practices, some more friendliness, or maybe some more, looking at the unpleasant or unbeautiful aspects of that particular theme. Yeah. And maybe it requires some dealing with that particular issue directly, rather than just trying to calm it down. Until we can get to the source of it, the causes of it, it's not going to find rest. It's not going to be peaceful. Not going to find peace or rest. So sometimes just going through the kind of perfunctory motions, like watching the breathing, okay, it has an effect, but you have to also check in with our practice. Is it really working? I mean, the Buddha said it works, but if you apply it in the right way, you see, requires, a kind of a matching up of these the eight factors of the Eightfold Path. Is there right energy there? Is there right mindfulness? Is there right concentration? Is there right view? Maybe we haven't got the right view yet. For example, some people they believe. They just have a belief. If I do this long enough, I'll get some results. That's not right view. Right view is understanding the principle of cause and effect. So you have to apply the right causes first before you get the right effect. And just kind of hoping it'll work this way. And if you're applying something and it's not working, well, you got to look again, reevaluate it. Yeah. If the result doesn't happen, then you haven't applied the right cause yet. Very simple. Maybe we have to reflect or reconsider what the right cause is, what'll give the right result. So sometimes it does require a little bit of investigation, and does require some circumspection, some investigation. One of the factors of enlightenment is investigation of Dhamma. So we're aware of something, particular habits of mind. Well, you need to investigate it. The second stage is investigating it. What is this really? What's its wider implications? What's triggering it off? What's giving it substance? What's nourishing it? Rather than just hope that we just keep watching the breath and go away one day. maybe just keep watching it. Just keep watching the breath long enough, and it'll get bored with you and go away. This guy refuses to play with it. I just get bored. But through investigation can lead to understanding. Then understanding the cause, and only by getting down to the understanding the real cause of these particular phenomena of mind, can we actually make a resolution, not just pacify them or get bored with them, but to make some resolution. We understand what their real nature is, right down to their source. So the Buddha gives us some very clear directions to follow in practice. And of course, the one of the additional supports for it is continuity. One of the dangers I think nowadays is people have access to so many different ways of practice, that there's a danger that we don't carry it through, don't continue with it. But the real source of the real purpose of spiritual practice is to get down to the source, get right down to the very, very source. And it requires, it does require kind of like digging down through all the different levels of our being, and sometimes some of these things will be not very pleasant. So it's very easy to kind of cop out and try something different. Try a bit of this, and then it doesn't gets to be a bit unpleasant and uncomfortable. Try something else. Yeah. So one of the benefits of, say, having a guide, a good spiritual friend, is they can give you the encouragement to continue, to keep going with it. And there will always be periods when I say there is some noticeable progress, if you like, see some changes. Other times, not much happens. Sometimes it can just seem like for quite a long period of time, but nothing's happening. But sometimes we have our particular expectations. We expect certain things to happen, but actually, when we are investigating the nature of our minds, many surprises there. Many times it's not what we expect. People they usually have some kind of, interpretation of what enlightenment is or something. They go enlightenment, and there'll be a light go on, bing. But the Buddha points out that enlightenment is the cessation of suffering. And sometimes it's be hard to notice, that how our life is becoming more or less uncomfortable, or we do feel more peaceful, or do feel more at ease with ourselves. Less friction, less conflict, less annoyances. Sometimes it's hard to see it because we're in it, as it were. We're right in it. Maybe it takes other people to recognize how more easygoing we are, how peaceful we are. We think that enlightenment is some kind of great dramatic scene, just like the rest of our life is. It's easy to notice the suffering, very dramatic, the suffering, but the peace of mind is so dramatic, very undramatic, fortunately. If somebody asked you, are you enlightened yet? You say, well, more peaceful anyway. Say, oh, well, doesn't sound like much. Enlightenment sounds more exciting. But as the practice continues, we discover, a great variety of different things about ourselves, many things we didn't know before. Most people, they live very unconsciously. They aren't really aware of what's going on in their mind most of the time. I remember one time when somebody asked me about the Buddhist teachings, and I mentioned about how the Buddha was pointing out about how, life is very unsatisfactory ultimately. And they just kind of shut down. What do you mean? What do you mean? I'm having fun. I'm enjoying myself. I really am having fun. You don't look like you're happy. I think you're just fooling yourself, really. And just recently going through all these airports, and all these officials, I guess, or something or other, these people in the airports. So, oh, how you doing? How you doing? And I'm sure if I was going to say, well, do you want to hear my story? Next, please, next. They don't really want to know how you are. So you just say, fine, 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 yeah. But most people, they have to, at least appear to be doing well, see. And otherwise, you're not winning the game, you see. So many people are living, as it were, kind of an artificial life just because that's what you're supposed to do. It's just like playing in a Hollywood movie. Yeah? You gotta always, play the hero all the time. And when somebody's not doing well, you don't want to even hear about it. I was wondering why, people in the West are so reluctant to admit, when they're not doing well. And I realized that, it's hard to admit it because we don't have a solution. Whereas I noticed in Thailand, people can acknowledge, they're suffering. They're suffering. It's not a bad thing to say you're suffering. In fact, it can even be kind of good, because it means that you're practicing Buddhism. If you're suffering, you're a devoted Buddhist then. But why you can acknowledge that you're suffering is because there's a path to follow. There's a path out of it. There's a solution to it. It's not an end in itself. Yeah, the Buddha gave us the path to the cessation of suffering. But for most people in a Western context, they haven't come across that. And you can't admit you're suffering because you don't know the way out. You know, and the way out is to kind of numb yourself or distract yourself or avoid it altogether, deny it, which of course is not a real solution to it. But even though, you know, as Buddhists, we know there is a path to follow, to practice, to realize the cessation of suffering, yeah, it's a matter of putting it into practice too. Yeah, there's a path available to us. What do we do with our time and our energy? And do we really get down to the practice, really develop the exercises, really practice morality, meditation, or we go back to our old habits again, thinking about ourselves? You know, and on the one of the teaching sessions I gave, I mentioned about the in my book about the 4 stages of how self develops. And I mentioned about the second stage is about the arising of I, for example. It's the thought I am, which is primarily comes out of the sense impingement, whenever there's sense contact. You know, there is say hearing, for example, and if you just be aware of hearing, you may notice a little voice saying, "Oh, I hear," which is not correct actually. Your eye doesn't hear, your ear hears. No, that's a bad joke. That's why I didn't use I, because there is hearing, you know, there is sound that impinges upon the ear, you know, and the mind says there's hearing going on, and then your perception says, oh, hearing bird song or something. But of course, that's for most people, it's too complicated, and it happens so quickly. So rather than, you know, there's hearing, there's sound, and then there's hearing, and then there's perception. You just say, oh, I hear. Put it down to one simple word, I. And then after a while, you keep saying that, and you believe there is actually somebody here, some I, who is actually hearing, when actually it's the ear that's hearing, and the brain putting it together. So just by having the wrong interpretation, the wrong way of seeing it, and then we create. Just by it becomes a habit. The sense of an I becomes a habit. Unfortunately, there's somebody who was listening to this talk, and then they said, "Oh, that was wonderful. Just I can just notice now how often I keep arising. You know, I this and I that and I the other, and you know, I said they just never noticed it before. It just became a, you know, a kind of a perfunctory habit to say I this and I that, and just becoming aware of it. You know, is creating this artificial sense of a self. You know, it's just created by an old habit. But when you're aware of it, at least you can stop maybe sometime. And it's one of the most direct teachings the Buddha gave. You know, just stay with the hearing, just stay with the seeing, just stay with the sensing. If you do that, then there's no sense of I rising, no sense of self arising. You know, it's an old habit, so it's not so easy to break. But if you're aware of it, at least you can pause anyway and recognize, oh, this is a false thinking. This is a wrong view. This isn't correct. This is ignorance. And maybe sometimes you can just be with that actual sense impression, just hearing, and just the hearing, and don't have to do anything with it. It's not a problem. Just the hearing. No self there they have to defend or hold on to or push away or whatever. just sound. But it's a matter of putting these practices into our everyday life too. It's one thing to read about it or learn about it. It's like in the classroom, you learn the lesson, but unless you put it into everyday practice, it doesn't become part of your way of living. And it's so easy for the old habits to come back again. Yeah. As somebody said, it's easy to be enlightened. It's just hard to stay enlightened. That's all. You can have these insights. Oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. Right, I got that. Next minute, you're back to your old habits again. So enlightenment just went out. The light went out. Enlightened for a moment, and then it's gone again. But the more that you can recognize that, and recognize just how peaceful that is, how there is no suffering in that. It's just the sound, and nobody having to deal with it, nobody having to fight with it or chase after it. Right. A different way of relating, a different way of being, which is free of suffering. You recognize that, and right, I can appreciate that. So, I try to put it into practice more diligently, more relevantly to the present moment. And of course, the Buddha's teachings is to be, investigated, to be practiced, to be put into practice in everyday life, to be seen, each one of us, for ourselves. The Buddha's already been there, done that, but for most of us, it's still something which is we have to learn about, study about it, and then try to realize it. But it can be done. And just as the Buddha has and his disciples, it can be realized, each one for themselves. So while it can seem like sometimes a daunting task, but if you recognize the value of freedom from suffering, well, it has some value then. You can say it has the most, I would say, the greatest value in life. So many people are they're running around, creating all kinds of suffering for themselves, without realizing that, what are they doing actually? Just creating more suffering. But there is a way out of it. And the more that you can recognize that and experience that, then you see that this will really work for us. And not just for the Buddha, but for us too. So hopefully if you put the teaching into practice well enough, you'll see something to be experienced, each one of us, for ourselves. So hopefully you'll be able to see it for yourself.
Sadhu, sadhu.